I got into this discussion earlier, it was pretty strange, with Aaron about this phenomena that everyone has of time speeding up. Because you have a lot of people in recent years that are complaining that they feel like time is actually going faster.
Particularly like things seem to be accelerating to something.
Isn't it? I mean, if we look at our life, it seems in the past 100 years, life been accelerating quite fast.
Yeah.
In the past 20,
It's
much
getting
faster.
faster and faster.
We're getting a lot of answers from physics and psychology claiming that, well, that's just a byproduct of getting older. But that doesn't make sense, because if just getting older was simply all it took to feel like time was speeding up, then wouldn't it maintain that the older you get, then it's like the faster time speeds up? So like my great grandma wakes up tomorrow, but she thinks it's next week. I mean, to me, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But other scientists have come out and posited that this feeling of time speeding up actually has to do with the fact that as we continue to use digital technology, the ability of our brains to process information is what's actually speeding up. And a byproduct of that is this sense that time is speeding up. And that makes more sense, because it does seem that as the years go by, it feels like, wasn't it just Christmas? Then all of a sudden they're selling stuff for Valentine's Day. And now all of a sudden they're selling stuff with Easter bunnies all over it. It just feels like everything is actually just speeding up. But there is a scientific basis for the idea that our brains are actually processing information faster as we use these digital technologies more. It's actually changing the way that we process information.
We're exposed to more information in one day than the people in the late 1800s were exposed to in a 7 or 8 year period.
So you'll remember that it came out a few years back that Microsoft did a study, and it was widely reported everywhere that we had lost a third of our attention span in society, that humans on average had an attention span of 12 seconds back in 2000, and that by 2013, the attention span was down to 8 seconds, which, as was widely reported by the media, is 1 second less than a goldfish.
New research tells us that this next story has about 8 seconds to gain your interest. That's the length of the average Canadian's attention span, according to new research by Microsoft. It's dropped by about 4 seconds since 2000. And scientists think that growing use of mobile internet could be to blame.
One of the things that's also mentioned in this report that was not widely mentioned by the media that I think is key has to do with the fact that they admit that this use of digital technology is changing the way our brains process information. And in the foreword, you have the consumer insights lead for Microsoft Canada say, it's no surprise that increased media consumption and digital lifestyles reduce the ability for consumers to focus for extended periods of time. But I never would have guessed that tech-savvy consumers, because see, they got to put a positive spin on this, tech-savvy consumers are actually getting better at processing information and encoding that information to memory. If there's no need to stay tuned in, why not move on to the next new exciting thing for another hit of dopamine? So this technology is training our brains to just jump from one hit of dopamine to another and get that and move on and get that and move on. Is that a positive thing? First of all, they go on to say that this is great because it's teaching us to multitask. And it says here, because this was done in Canada, Canadians' digital lifestyles are changing the brain, decreasing the ability for prolonged focus and increasing their appetite for more stimuli. Which just makes us sound like a bunch of digital drug addicts who just can't wait to get that next hit. You see, just because you can multitask at something, if you're only doing it so fast that you're just trying to move on to the next thing, I mean, how much of a skill is that really? But here's where my question comes in. So I was looking at this and I went, oh, okay, so in 2000 we had an average human attention span of 12 seconds. Then in 2013, we had an average human attention span of 8 seconds. What's going to happen when 5G rolls out?
We built our network for the future of wireless. Just imagine how we'll be able to harness technology to make it work for people. Detailed information you need in real time, blurring the lines between virtual and reality.
Ben?
Gabrielle? And we won't stop.
This is my question, because every 10 years we get a new generation of wireless technology on our phones, and 3G came out, depending on what source you look it up, 3G came out around the turn of the century, 1998 to the 2001 period. So right around the time period where the average human attention span was 12 seconds. And then 4G came out in 2008. So 5 years after that, they found out, oh, we're down to 8 seconds. But the difference in speed between 3G and 4G, and then 4G and 5G, is going to be like night and day. There's no comparison to what they're saying about the difference in speed between 4G and 5G.
So what's so special about a 5G future? Well, first of all, it's fast. Like 100 to 250 times faster than 4G. That's like going from streaming one Netflix movie in HD to streaming 400 movies in 8K at the same time.
You're saying with 5G, it's going to be 100 times faster than 4G and not only is it going to be 100 times faster, but it's going to have no latency at all. So whereas with 4G, you get 28 milliseconds of latency when you click on something or try to do something, 5G is going to be 1 millisecond of latency. So basically that means real time.
What sets 5G aside is its crazy low latency rate, which is the amount of delay between the sending and receiving of information. 4G tends to average about 100 to 200 milliseconds. And to be fair, 100 milliseconds is fast. Human reaction time is about 200 to 300 milliseconds. But 5G will get it down to 1 millisecond.
It's going to be so fast, it's going to be as if you're doing it in real time. I mean, they don't even talk about this. Of all these articles that have been coming out in the last few years about burnout, they don't even talk about this. They all over the place. You have articles coming out talking about employee burnout, young adults are burned out, doctors are burned out, all these different worker types are burned out. Burnout is everywhere. It's at an all-time high for everyone, seemingly across the board.
Are you feeling burned out at work? During the financial crisis, companies held back on hiring, asking existing staff to do more with less. But nearly a decade on, this appears to have become a permanent fixture for many workplaces, and widespread burnout now has some companies scrambling for fixes.
And the only time they talk about technology in reference to burnout is to say that because we have it, people at jobs are expected to do more with it. But they're not talking about the fact that technology itself is literally rewiring the way our brains process information. I don't know. I've even noticed in my own family that people like to sit on the couch and play on their phone while they're watching a movie now. It's like they're doing everything all at one time. There's no... To try and tell someone to get off their phone so they can watch a movie now is considered rude. They're actually, in theaters now, they're going to start allowing people to text on the phone while they watch a movie, because otherwise they're going to lose business, because that's how many people cannot separate doing that anymore. But the problem with this all is that they have shown that the increase in this technology and the way that it is rewiring us, because we're only focusing on visual media largely, is actually causing a decline in critical thinking and analysis, which nobody's talking about, but it's changing the way that we are able to, how deeply are we able to process information as a society. So this came out of UCLA. This research came out of UCLA back in 2009. So this is over a decade ago now. But you have research by Patricia Greenfield, UCLA Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Director of Children's Digital Media Center in Los Angeles. And she's saying that by using more visual media, students will process information better, which is what Microsoft also said, right? However, most visual media are real-time media that do not allow time for reflection, analysis, or imagination. Those do not get developed by real-time media, such as television or video games. Technology is not a panacea in education because the skills that are being lost. Studies show that reading develops imagination, induction, reflection, and critical thinking, as well as vocabulary. Reading for pleasure is the key to developing these skills, and students today have more visual literacy and less print literacy. And many students don't read for pleasure, and students haven't been doing that for decades. And ultimately, she says, wiring classrooms for internet access does not enhance learning. Multitasking, while that is a skill, because that's what Microsoft said, we're becoming better multitaskers, right? But she says in other studies it has shown that multitasking prevents people from getting a deeper understanding of information because they're just flitting from one topic to the next, like bam, bam, bam. They're not really staying on anything. There's even studies that have come out like this one back in 2014 where they showed that automating cockpits was actually negatively impacting a pilot's ability to remember how to perform key critical thinking tasks. So this is something that science has clearly shown, that critical thinking skills go down as the use and reliance on digital technology goes up, right? So again, it comes back to the question of what is going to happen then when 5G is here and it's 100 times faster than 4G, which is extreme, like so much fast. The difference between 3 and 4G is nothing at all compared to the difference we're about to see when 5G comes in.
And being able to send and receive information in what is essentially real time means that we can use 5G to replace real-time interactions.
Which has basically no latency pretty much at all. 1 millisecond is going to be like nothing. So that's just going to be straight up in real time. I mean, you're talking about creating a society of moths, I guess, flitting around a light on a porch somewhere. And there's a quote from Albert Einstein that comes in really well right here. He said, "Somebody who only reads newspapers and at best books of contemporary authors looks to me like an extremely nearsighted person who scorns eyeglasses," which he wrote in a note on classic literature in 1952. He said, "He is completely dependent on the prejudices and fashions of his times since he never gets to see or hear anything else." I mean, just the level of deeper thinking, of deeper analysis, of going to actual books on a shelf. I mean, that kind of thinking is disappearing as people just flit from one digital source to the next digital source for that next hit of dopamine, as Microsoft puts it. So what is society going to look like when masses of people lose their ability to have a deep thought? What is going to happen if large segments of society lose the ability for deeper reflection and critical thinking skills? I mean, it's like every dystopic novel and movie I've ever seen. Everything from H.G. Wells straight on to George Orwell.